So, when you think about the grand game of life, it turns out there isn't just one way to win. Evolution has actually come up with two totally different but equally successful master strategies for surviving and reproducing. Today, we're going to dive into this really elegant concept called R/K selection theory. Every single organism out there shares the same fundamental goal: pass on your genes to the next generation. But the way they achieve that goal, it can look radically different from one species to another. So, how does life actually win? Does it go for sheer numbers and explosive growth, or is it all about playing the long game with slow and steady dominance? All right, let's get into it. Here's a quick look at our game plan. We'll kick things off with the two core strategies themselves. Then we'll see how the environment basically sets all the rules. After that, we'll meet the players, figure out how we measure who's succeeding, and finally, we'll look at why it's not always so black and white.
At its very heart, this whole concept boils down to a fundamental choice that every single species has to make, whether it knows it or not. How do you spend your limited amount of energy?
And this brings us to a really core term: a life history strategy. The best way to think about it is like an energy budget. A species just can't maximize everything at once. It has to make trade-offs. Does it pour its energy into growing big and strong, or does it invest in making as many babies as possible, as fast as possible? It's these trade-offs that really define a species' entire strategy. So what is it that determines which strategy is going to work best? Well, it's the environment. The playing field itself literally dictates the rules of the game. Let's take a look at how that actually works. Okay, so on one hand, you have these really unstable, unpredictable environments. Picture a field that just got cleared, or maybe a puddle that only exists for a few weeks. Resources might be everywhere for a little while, but things can change in a heartbeat, and there's not a lot of competition. Then, on the other hand, you have super stable environments, like an old-growth rainforest. Resources are consistent, but man, is it crowded. Competition is incredibly fierce. And these two scenarios, they demand completely different game plans. And of course, these different approaches give rise to our two main players: the R-selected species and the K-selected species. So let's meet them. First up, we've got the R-selected species. You can think of these as the quantity over quality strategists. Their entire game plan revolves around maximizing R. That's the intrinsic rate of population increase. They absolutely thrive in those chaotic, unstable environments we just talked about. The strategy is basically get in, reproduce like crazy, and then get out. That's why their populations often have these massive boom and bust cycles. We're talking about things like bacteria, insects, and weeds that just seem to take over your garden overnight. And in the other corner, you have the K-selected species. These are the quality strategists. They're built for life in those stable, crowded places. Their goal isn't rapid growth. It's to maintain a population that's hovering right around the environment's carrying capacity, or K. For them, it's all about long-term survival and being able to outcompete your neighbors. This is the world of elephants, whales, and those massive ancient oak trees. Now this chart, this is fantastic because it just lays out all those trade-offs side by side. Let's just walk through it real quick. For our R-selected species, you see a small body size, which makes sense, and then a ton of offspring, but with basically zero parental care. This leads to short lifespans, and it means they're not great competitors. Now, flip over to the K-selected side. It's the complete opposite. Large bodies, very few offspring, but a huge investment in parental care. That allows for long lifespans and turns them into really fierce competitors. You can see the two opposing strategies perfectly here. Okay, so we've got these two very different strategies, but how do we actually see the results? I mean, how can we measure the outcomes of these life and death decisions that species are making? Well, a really key way is by looking at what are called survivorship curves. And hey, for anyone studying ecology, this is a concept you'll definitely see on exams. The R-selected species, the ones producing tons of offspring with no parental help, they typically show a type 3 curve. This just means most of them die really, really young, but a few lucky ones make it. On the flip side, K-selected species, with all that investment in just a few young, they show a type 1 curve where most individuals actually survive all the way to old age. And this chart just makes that point crystal clear. For the R strategy, mortality for the young is through the roof. Just think about an oyster releasing millions of eggs. Most are going to get eaten or just won't find a place to grow. But for the K strategy, it's a completely different story. Juvenile mortality is low, all thanks to that parental protection and care. Now, it's really easy to look at all this and think of it as a rigid black and white system. You're either R or you're K. But, nature is almost never that simple. So it's really crucial that we talk about some of the common traps and points of confusion to get the full picture. So here's the most important point to remember. R and K selection are really just the two extreme ends of a long spectrum. Most organisms in the real world actually fall somewhere in between, showing a mix of different traits. It's a continuum, not just two neat little boxes. And this leads us to a classic trap question that a lot of people fall for. It seems logical, right? Small things reproduce fast, so they must all be R-selected. But is it always true? And the answer is a big, firm no. While yeah, there's often a connection, the strategy is fundamentally about that energy budget we talked about. How is energy allocated between reproduction and survival? You can absolutely have small organisms that invest a ton of energy into just a few offspring, which leans them way more towards a K strategy. Body size just isn't the whole story. So, if you're going to take away just one thing from all this, let it be this right here. Our selected species are playing the numbers game, trying to maximize reproduction to colonize unstable places. Meanwhile, K-selected species are playing the long game, focusing on survival and competition in those stable, crowded environments. All right, let's do a quick fire round just to lock this in. An oyster releasing millions of eggs? Yep, classic R-selected. An elephant, with its long pregnancy and years of care? Definitely K-selected. What if you just see the trait high parental care? That points straight to a K strategy. And high juvenile mortality? That is the signature of an R strategy. Easy, right? And that leaves us with one last big thought. We've established that it's the environment that really dictates the winning strategy. So in a world where our environments are changing faster than ever, what does that mean for the future? Can a species actually adapt and shift its position along this R/K spectrum over evolutionary time? Well, that's a huge question that ecologists are working really hard to answer right now.